Welcome to the Aerpod, a podcast about aviation careers. The U.S. military operates the most advanced and capable aircraft in the world, but from the F-22 to the B-2, nobody kicks ass without tanker gas. Today we talked with Julia. Julia operated on the KC-10 Extender, an aerial refueling platform that has since been retired, but during its time was able to support missions of aircraft all across the world.
The military is willing to accept more risk because the mission is more critical.
We talked about some of the challenges that make refueling tougher than you might expect.
If I'm pushing this fuel at too high of a PSI, the fighter's never going to get fuel. They're never going to be able to stay on the boom itself.
What could make a long day even longer?
We had hit 8 to 9 hours in our day. They had an aircraft malfunction where they had to go back. So they gave us 60,000 pounds of fuel and extended our day probably by like another 5 hours.
How unmanned aircraft are changing the landscape of aircrew operations.
We do what's called no blink. We're flying 24-hour operations. We have a launch and recovery crew overseas. We probably will fly 4 to 6 airplanes in a day.
How the military can help advance your higher education goals.
I started applying for schools while I was on deployment. I ended up getting into the veteran cohort at Princeton University.
And her experience in an aviation role that is now all but extinct.
The expectation is the subject matter expert on aircraft systems. It was a lot more demanding than being a boom operator.
Now let's check in with Julia and see where her interest in aviation got started.
My grandfather was, he was a C-130 mechanic during Vietnam. So that was kind of the limited experience as far as just aviation exposure. We didn't have any like pilots or anything like that in the family. But he is interested in aviation, if that makes sense. Like he just always had like kind of the hobbyist side of it just from his experience within the Air Force. So that's kind of what piqued my interest in aviation, was just going to his house and seeing all like the C-130 mechanic books and all the tech manuals and all of that kind of stuff, and being a kid and kind of reading through and just getting interested in it that way, talking to him about it. Their house actually backs up to the airport, the local like regional airport. So he likes to sit in the backyard and watch the planes come in, and I just thought it was funny. He had like a like his own like radio essentially, and he would listen to just like ATC like live and know which planes are coming in from where. And so that's kind of the extent as far as the background goes with aviation. But I think really that relationship and kind of having the aviation piece piqued my interest, and then building it through that relationship is really kind of what got me moving forward with it.
I think a lot of us found that passion for aviation through a family member. My grandfather flew B-25s in World War II. Awesome. My dad was just a private pilot, so he had already finished flying by the time
that's still a pilot, born. Not just a private.
It is. You're right. Yeah, it is still a pilot. But he had already finished flying by the time I was born. But just having that kind of influence, I think, got a lot of us into it. Some of the other people I talked to said same kind of thing. I had a family member or brother, uncle, whoever it was. So when did you start considering the military as an option for your career?
For me, I think it was always an option. So even though I didn't come from an aviation family, I came from a big military family. So at a young age, it was kind of impressed upon us that like if you're not fit for college, if you don't want to go to college, you don't have to. Like the military is an option. Here is kind of what it has to offer. My mom was in the Army. Uncle, grandfather, multiple, just kind of a big military background in general. So we had that always in the back of our mind as an option. I didn't really have a lot of exposure to like directly military. By the time my mom had gotten out, I was born, and so she didn't, like I didn't grow up as like an Army brat or anything like that. But the pride of the military is still like in the family, so it was just always kind of there as an option. You don't have to do college if you didn't want to do college. Here's what the military can do for you if you want to do college later, that kind of thing, if that makes sense. Sure.
Did you do ROTC or anything?
No, I did not actually went in. So I when I was leaving high school, I had a soccer scholarship, and so I actually went on and pursued that. And I was really young when I graduated. I had a late birthday, so I was 17. So when I got to college and was 17 years old and figured out that, oh my gosh, I actually have to do more than just play soccer. I didn't
Right.
want to, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was like, I guess I'm just going to pick business. I had nothing. And then after one or two classes, I was just like, I don't think this is a good fit for me. I would love to stay and play soccer, but the, not everything else was kind of fitting into place. Um, what I actually ended up doing, my uncle is a retired Green Beret, and I talked to him about it, and he kind of like almost reminded me that I've always had this like knack for aviation, and that this is something that he felt I'd be interested in. So he broke it down and helped me talk to recruiters about like going into the Air Force. This is what she wants to do, and she kind of made it, or he helped me make it clear to them that I wasn't just going to go to basic training if I didn't get specific jobs. So he was a really good resource in that sense, as far as taking the ASVAB and knowing what scores I needed to get into which aviation jobs, and kind of used him as a resource to shift from college to going the enlisted route.
Right. Yeah, and for picking your, I guess, pathway within the military, is that common or no? Because I hear a lot of the phrase, needs of the Air Force, where once you're in, they kind of tell you what they need, not what you want, and that's where you end up going.
I think that's a product of your recruiter,
Okay.
in my opinion. I was lucky enough to kind of have the mentorship from him, or from my uncle, excuse me, to be clear. So that when I went into the recruiter's office, I knew that this is kind of where I was gonna. This is where my boundaries were. I think for a lot of people that go into the military who don't have kind of that background of knowledge of what you're going into, I think they go in with the blanket questions, and they hear what the recruiter has to say. But if they don't know what specifically they want to do in the military or what they're interested in, you get more of the needs of the military type of jobs. And that's kind of where I find that most people end up either really happy and they're like, wow, I fell into this and this is great, or really unhappy and it just wasn't a good fit for them.
Sure. And going in with that in mind, what were the areas you were most interested in?
Career enlisted aviator
Okay.
was the goal, is pretty much what I told my recruiter. At the time, I was kind of eyeballing more of like a loadmaster role.
Hmm.
And that's how I ended up as a boom operator on the KC-10. But when I got that job and they told me, I was going to be on a refueler and stuff like that, I was actually really disappointed because I wasn't familiar with what in-flight refueling actually was outside of seeing that old Air Force One movie. It was like, oh, wow,
Yeah.
that looks cool.
Very, very accurate movie.
Yeah, super spot on. Nothing is wrong there. No, but I was actually disappointed because I was like, oh man, like I'm just going to be, I guess I get to be around planes. I shouldn't like look a gift horse in the mouth, but I thought I was just going to be like refueling on the ground, and then that was going to be my life. So when I got there and I actually started to do the job and they handed me my first flight suit, I was like, are you sure? Like you got the wrong person? Like is this it? And it ended up being like amazing. Like turned my life upside down as far as just my exposure to aviation, my love for it grew significantly, being able to fly. I mean, and I got paid to travel in my 20s and kind of see the impact that I was making on the world with all this travel and the missions that we were doing. So it ended up being really great. Just caught me by surprise.
So I got a couple buddies that fly, or either have flown in the Air Force or are still flying. So I know what their training looks like, but that's, pilot side is a little different than the other roles. What was your training like, and what were some of the challenges that you experienced going through that?
So once you first start as a career enlisted aviator, you go through like an aircrew fundamentals course, and that's just a few weeks. And so the first couple months is really just ground training, similar to kind of pilot training. You learn the books, you learn the bare minimums of flying, similar to being a private pilot. And then once you get through that, you get assigned to your base, you go to your base, and that's when you start to actually do the aircraft specific stuff. So start with ground training in conjunction with simulator training. So you get a few weeks of simulator training, and then once you pass that check ride, then you can move on to act, like flying in the aircraft, and those are run by two different companies. So at the time for the KC-10, the simulator buildings were run by the company Flight Safety. So we had civilian contractors that used to be boom operators that did all of our simulator training, and then they would push us over to like our squadrons or like the actual flying instructors once we were done with that. And then after that, once you get into the plane, it's kind of up to you as far as the timeline goes. Like, again, similarly to getting your pilot's licenses and stuff like that, the amount of effort you put into it is what you're going to get out of it. You know, if you come up prepared, you show up, you've studied, you know what you're doing, like you're going to breeze right through it as long as they have the flights available for you. It also depends on how many like students that came in with you also. When I was coming in, we had 4 of us, so it took a little bit longer in certain instances because they had to break up flights between 4 different people. And as a boom operator, you have to do a certain type of like refueling. So you have to do a heavy refueling, which is, you know, C-17s, C-5s, anything that's not a fighter. And then you have to get fighter specifics. So you have to get cleared off on fighter refueling, and then night and day refuelings also. So a lot of like just scheduling manipulation there as far as kind of getting squeezed in. And then once you do that, you go onto the cargo training. And then that can take, I wish I could even give you a number, honestly. It could go really fast if they have the missions available, or it can take forever. But it really is just a matter of, are you understanding how to like safely load cargo onto this airplane? And can you get it from point A to point B and, you know, and kind of run the show? Because that's kind of the nature of it when it comes to cargo is there's a crew that brings the pallets up to you, but at the end of the day, it's your airplane and your responsibility to make sure that everything's on there, it's done safely, weight limitations, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of again, what you put into it is what you get out of it.
Sure. Yeah, 3 things that I didn't know out of that story you just told. So one, I didn't know there were simulators for refueling booms. That's pretty cool. Is it the aircraft that you're refueling in the simulator, is that like computer controlled or somebody controlling the aircraft that you're refueling?
So it's run by the sim instructor. So okay. He has his own like essentially like cockpit joystick that he flies the plane. So it's not linked to another aircraft or another simulator, if that makes sense.
Right.
But yeah, so it's run by the sim instructor itself.
Yeah. Second thing I didn't know, I guess it does make sense, but that you had to do different training for the different types of aircraft you're refueling. So what's different about refueling a C-17 versus like an F-16?
Time, weight, those are the biggest things. Fighters can move faster, so the variability as far as your safety margins is a lot smaller. Reaction time, where the receptacles are. So the biggest thing with most fighters is their receptacles are on the back of their canopy. So you have to kind of make sure you're accurately moving around the canopy in order to not hit their aircraft with a boom, but also to not, hit their canopy. With C-17s or C-5s, they're slower moving aircraft. You feel more in control because you just have more time. The biggest things with those is how heavy are you and how heavy are they? Because you have to deal with a lot of wake turbulence when it comes to refueling those. And if like a C-5 comes in way too fast, you're gonna have a really hard time trying to make that contact, or it can end up being unsafe. So it really just comes down to practicing these reaction times, knowing what your emergency procedures are if something like that were to happen, and taking into account different variabilities as far as even like boom sensitivity goes. In the KC-10, you have the ability to change the stick sensitivity. So when you have like more wake turbulence, you might want like a stiffer boom so it's not flopping around a lot more, versus with a fighter, you want to be able to move it a lot more swifter. So just kind of practicing these different types of flying of the boom itself as well.
Yeah. I want to dig into that more once we get into more of the aerial refueling side. But the last piece that I didn't know from the story you told is that you guys carry cargo too. And I guess it makes sense. Big aircraft, and you're already
Yeah.
moving it somewhere anyway, so might as well take something with you. But so you're almost learning a loadmaster type role alongside the refueling role, correct?
Yeah, no, not all. Yeah, that we are essentially dual. It they don't call it dual trained, but yes. So you
Okay.
have to be fully cargo qualified. You have to be fully air refueling qualified to be considered a mission boom. So one that doesn't need an instructor.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, so getting into the refueling job, one KC-10, my favorite refueler. I like the tri-jets. They're super cool.
Yep,
Um,
I'm
and
biased, but yes.
yeah. And a layperson not familiar with aviation or military aviation, you described it pretty concisely, but your job is to refuel other aircraft in the air.
Mhm.
And you are in control of that boom. When I was younger and I saw that, it kind of looks like, the boom goes down, airplane flies up to it, and it just plugs in and sits there and gets fuel. But it's more complicated than that, right? So what's
Yeah,
that process from, when the aircraft is coming up to you needing fuel to you actually, plugging in and giving them the fuel and all that?
sure. So it depends on the aircraft itself. I know that's such a cliche. Um, because we have two different forms of refueling as well. We have the drogue basket, which is essentially just like the line that goes out and it's a basket, and that's kind of what most people think when they see like refueling, and those are for aircrafts that don't have boom receptacles. So that would be mostly like Navy, like F-18s would hook up to the drogue. That's fairly autonomous from a boom operator standpoint. All you have to do is push it out there, and it is the receiver's responsibility to make connection with the drogue. When it comes to the boom, you have different settings for each aircraft. So there's essentially like a checklist that has a lineup of, C-17, these are the settings, these are the light settings, these are the sensitivity settings. This is how many fuel pumps that the engineer is allowed to use. Because that's another thing that, as far as conjunction with the crew, you have to coordinate with them. Hey, I have an F-16 coming up, so the flight engineer needs to know how many refueling pumps can I give them, because if I'm pushing, this fuel at too high of a psi, the fighter's never going to get the aircraft. They're never going to be able, or sorry, the fighter's never going to get fuel. They're never going to be able to stay on the boom itself.
Hmm.
So there's just a lot of specifics as far as like being familiar with what aircraft you're refueling and knowing what settings they need in the aircraft.
So when you say it couldn't stay on the boom itself, if the pressure's too high, it'll like physically push the
Yeah.
fighter away from the boom.
Yep. So the way that the boom works is it has ours has rudders and it has elevators. So it also has a telescope. So the telescope has its limitations, and the higher the pressure, if the fighter, or sorry, the aircraft in general, not just the fighter, if they can't stay or keep up with airspeed or something like that because the pressure might be too high or we might be going too fast, vice versa, the boom itself will telescope out, and once it hits that cutoff limitation, it'll cut the aircraft off from the boom. It's kind of like a safety feature of it. So it's kind of telling them, hey, you've hit your limit. So to avoid ripping the boom off of our airplane, we're just going to punch you off. Because the way that the boom itself works is once you make contact with the receptacle, it's kind of like a ball and socket. So the receptacle on the receiver aircraft clamps onto our boom. And that'll be like the boom nozzle, essentially, that it clamps onto. And once it hits those limitations, it'll just pop that clamp off and force that disconnect.
So there's multiple. I said the KC-10 is my favorite just because I like tri-jets. I think they look cool. But multiple different
It's a sharp
refueling,
aircraft.
yeah, refueling aircraft in the military. I think three most common: KC-10, KC-135, and now the KC-46. What are kind of the differences in those? Are they operationally different? Do they have different capabilities, or are they just kind of different generations of the same type of mission?
I think it's kind of all encompassing. I think that the KC-10 and the KC-135 were, the main ones for the majority of the history of air refueling, right? As far as like modern day air-to-air refueling goes. I would say that because of the difference in size, the KC-10 had higher capabilities as far as air refueling goes. It also has higher capabilities as far as cargo goes. So those were kind of our two biggest missions were air refueling operations, cargo missions, and then troop deployment or PAX carrying, that type of thing. But the KC-135 is a smaller aircraft, so it doesn't have as much longevity as far as fueling goes. It can't carry as much fuel. You're probably looking at a difference of approximately 120,000 pounds of fuel that the KC-10 can have versus the 135. And that'll be the same for the 46 just because they're similar in size now. With the 135 not being able to be refueled in flight, that also poses a challenge as far as its longevity versus the KC-10, which it can be refueled in flight. So we'd be on deployment missions all the time where, say, there was another KC-135 out there and they had, they were hitting their bingo time or their time that they needed to go home, but they had just a little bit of fuel to give off. They would give it to us. We called that a kind of a consolidation. So they would consolidate their fuel into our aircraft. We would just stay out, we would pass it on, and they would go home. Sometimes it's an unfortunate name of the game, and it can extend your day quite a bit. But as far as capabilities go, I think that's one of the really cool things about the KC-10 is it had the reliability to stay up if it needed to.
Yeah,
I think the biggest limitation was, would have been like oil or running out of, something that can't be replenished in flight. As far as the KC-46 goes, I'm not super familiar with it just because when I transferred to being a flight engineer, I did not go with the KC-46 because it doesn't have a flight engineer on it. But I know that their mission now is obviously still the air refueling mission. They have a bigger cargo mission than the 135 does still. They are also doing a lot more air medevac type stuff. Which is not something that we really did on the KC-10.
Sure. Yeah. I didn't know that you could take fuel too. It's like refuelception.
Exactly.
One fuel to another.
Sometimes it's really bad if like we had an example where a KC-135 had probably like 60,000 pounds of fuel. We had already, at this point, we had hit maybe about 8 to 9 hours in our day. We were almost done. We were getting ready to go. We had our last set of receivers, and they had like an aircraft malfunction where they had to go back. So they gave us all that as much fuel as they could in order for them to get back safely. But by taking that, we pretty much took 60,000 pounds of fuel and extended our day probably by like another 5 hours or so. And like,
yeah, that's right.
As far as like the manning piece of it goes, or like the fatigue, you're just like, okay, that's what we're here for, but was not mentally prepared for it.
Yeah. Could you guys use your fuel that you were using to refuel other aircraft? Like you could burn it too, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So there are 6 fuel tanks in the KC-10, and we can just transfer fuel from wherever. Okay.
Very cool.
Yep.
And then describe why that mission, the aerial refueling mission, is so important to the military. You talked about the cargo side. There's some troop transport. There's some medevac now, I guess, with the KC-46. But that main mission of aerial refueling, what is so crucial about that to military operations?
Wow. That could be anything from taking a set of fighters from here to overseas to their deployed location. Like they don't have the longevity, they don't have the fuel capacity to get overseas. So we would, take a flight of insert your favorite fighter here and refuel them the entire way. And so it can, like I said, even like troop deployment, not from just a personnel in the aircraft standpoint, but the ability to move troops with equipment. but also like in a deployed location, you get a set of fighters that are attached to a mission, and they need to be kind of staying overwatch, or they have a target that they're seeking out, or we're waiting for them. Like, our job is to support them. That's the biggest thing. Supporting troops in contact, supporting troops on the ground, making sure that overhead watch and that overhead security is there for not just other aircraft, but for people on the ground, for any special operations or any troops in contact at all. Like that, it's more of that protective state, right? We're just one more step in that line of safety for them.
I want to talk about the flight engineer side because it's a very unique role, especially in today's day and age. There's very few, if any, aircraft anymore, I guess, now that they're retiring the KC-10 that use flight engineers. What were the responsibilities of that role?
Okay, so the responsibilities of that role are essentially your third crew member in the cockpit. So you have the two pilots. The flight engineer kind of sits off to the side, and they run all of the systems. So responsibilities from calculating takeoff landing data to watching everything, like managing pressurization in the aircraft, managing electric, hydraulic, fuel, all that stuff. The systems knowledge, that was the engineer's piece. Is the expectation is the flight engineer is the subject matter expert on aircraft systems. So it was a lot more demanding than being a boom operator, which at that point, I liked it. It was more of a challenge for me to kind of move from learning the back end of the aircraft and knowing everything there was to know about the air refueling system and knowing everything there was to know about cargo, and then moving to that role as a flight engineer and learning the rest of the systems of this aircraft and being able to kind of utilize both of those knowledge bases to essentially propel myself as far as just a crew member in general, a more proficient crew member. So I think that would be the biggest role. It's also good to have somebody that has those knowledge bases and to fly with other pilots who also have those knowledge bases, because you can bounce ideas off of each other. Like, hey, have you ever seen this before? No, I haven't, but it could be this or it could be this. What are you thinking? It created a really good conversation in the cockpit if there were to be some sort of abnormal situation, and to have everybody kind of on the same page was really good.
Yeah, so the branching off of that, there's a lot of controversy right now and debate around removing the second pilot from the cockpit, and I think initially in cargo operations, and eventually they want to talk about it with airlines and going to single pilot operations there with the advancement in systems and the advancing advancing AI and all the stuff that we're seeing, the Garmin Auto Land in a lot of civilian aircraft that have really impressive capabilities. And I wanted to tie that into the flight engineer role because I wasn't around as that debate was happening, but I imagine there was a lot of pushback on removing flight engineers from the cockpit as aircraft started to get more advanced systems and going to just a two-pilot cockpit. When you worked in a flight engineer role and you talked about how important it was to have that kind of three sources of debate or discussion in the cockpit for troubleshooting, do you see concerns about going to single pilot cockpits on larger aircraft like that, or do you see it as like the next evolution of removing the flight engineer, so to speak?
That's tough. I think my initial thought is, I do see concerns with that. We are starting to see this advancement in technology and the autonomy of a lot of these systems within the aircraft, and I think that's great. I think that human factors will always be a thing. We have a lot of companies, civilian companies now that do single pilot operations, like civilian air medical companies that fly helicopters. They'll fly single pilot operations, that kind of thing. They still kind of have a crew, but their crew in the back doesn't know the flight part, right? And the pilot doesn't know the medical part. So you have that really distinct line of knowledge base where it's like, yes, we are a crew, but if I'm a pilot by myself and I need help, sometimes it's more difficult to explain why I need help and what I need help with than it is to say, hey, call ATC, I need you to do XYZ for me. And have your second pilot be like, I got you, no problem. And kind of building that CRM piece of it, if that makes sense, with that similar knowledge base. I'm a big proponent of CRM in general. I think that it's always good to have a second set of eyes, especially when you get to longer flight operations where people are fatigued. If you're a single pilot and you start to get fatigued, who's there to back you up? And a lot of people don't know this or realize this, but when the flight engineer position originally started, the flight engineer was a pilot, and in civilian, that was kind of like make their way to the captain seat, right? You started as an engineer, then you moved to the right seat, then you moved to the left seat. So you had the two other people or three people in the cockpit to kind of really work together as a crew. And I think that by going single pilot ops, I think we're going to get away from a lot of the systems expertise. The more autonomous we get, I think it's really going to be imperative for pilots to ensure that they are still, sticking to the basics, making sure they're in the books, that kind of thing. Because you're not going to have anybody to back you up. You don't have the ability to call somebody and say, hey, I've never seen this before. And some of these new systems, these new autopilot systems, we don't know how they work. If you're adding AI into it, what technology is coming into it, it creates kind of this jumble of where are we at as pilots, how much say do I have as a pilot, and what is just the aircraft. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you have the medical side of it too. We've seen a number of instances where there's been a medical emergency in the cockpit, and it's left to the first officer or the captain, whoever is still up, to handle that entire aircraft by themselves. And you'd have to have some pretty advanced AI to recognize the pilot's incapacitated, now I got to take over. So
well, and say you're single pilot and you're straight and level and you're on autopilot and you go incapacitated. A, you're going to run out of fuel at some point, and B, who's going to land it? You know what I mean? Like the autopilot's not going to know, hey, the pilot's incapacitated, now I need to do these emergency procedures. From a human factor standpoint, I don't think single pilot ops is a good idea, but
yeah, I would agree with that. Staying on that trend of advances, you moved out of the kind of crewed operations into more unmanned stuff. Military has been doing unmanned aviation for a long time, but I want you to just talk about the distinction between your typical military unmanned operation versus like a civilian, you could go buy a DJI drone at Best Buy kind of thing.
Yeah. The one thing I will say is I didn't, like, manned versus unmanned, I didn't go from crewed to non-crewed.
Okay.
Where I fly now, we still fly as a crew. We have two pilots and we have a sensor operator. So we still have that three-man cockpit, if you will. Which, again, I like that. I like to be able to have the CRM. I like to have people to bounce ideas back and forth on. So in that sense, it's actually very similar militarily. The nice things are, I can get up and be like, hey, I gotta grab some food, or I gotta go to the bathroom, or that kind of thing, and I can rely on the second pilot that I'm flying with, and it's not a co-pilot versus an aircraft commander thing. It's more of a, hey, we are both equally qualified. I just happen to be the pilot in command today, but I can rely on you. And then you have the sensor operator too, and the sensor operator for ISR missions and stuff like that, they're the ones that are in complete control of the camera. So we heavily rely on them to know that system and to do their job and to be able to work together and say, hey, our customer just gave us, this grid or this target. Can you find it for me? We're gonna plot it together. I'm gonna build the flight plan. You build the camera plan, and you kind of go from there. So we still have a crewed manned system, just in an unmanned aircraft.
Yeah. Remotely operated, I guess is
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, remotely for sure. There are definitely some benefits to that. I don't travel nearly as much as I used to. That's unfortunate, but I do get to go home and sleep in my bed every night too. So, you get a little bit more a better family dynamic in that sense. But to go back to your question, I guess, as far as military versus going to Best Buy and buying a DJI or something like that, they're drastically different. And I think that people think that you can kind of go from one to the other. I think where we're kind of getting a little iffy on like regulation and policy is only needing that Part 107 test to fly these DJIs. I'm embarrassed to say it, but I'll say it. I can fly one of these big aircrafts all day. I've tried so many times to fly like the tiny quadcopters, and I just gave up. I'm like, I don't like it. I don't know what they like. And I think that they're great. They have really great uses for like infrastructure or real estate, like from a commercial side of things. Like people take a lot of really good pictures with them. You see them being used for sporting events. Like they have the systems in place to give you really awesome technology and output as far as the commercial base goes. They're just such drastic different worlds, and I don't think people realize that it is that drastic, if that makes sense.
Just to describe what I think most people think of as a drone, like we talked about, you go by the DJI thing, how that's typically operated in the U.S. I come from a background in unmanned operations. I did that for 7 years. And in the U.S., at least, most of those operations, somebody is standing in the same location that the drone's flying in, and they have to visually see it to fly it. Whereas you and the type of missions that the military could operate, somebody could be sitting in Grand Forks, North Dakota, where they fly the Global Hawk out of, and flying that thing all across the world. So capability-wise, extremely different. Size-wise, extremely different. Endurance-wise, extremely different.
Well, and just systems run, right? Like
Yeah.
you said, that with the smaller ones, you have to have, like legally, you have to have that line of sight for that Part 107, and you can't go above a certain altitude, and there's all these boxes that you have to check where we're not playing with that same red tape when we're flying for the military. We're, like you said, like sitting in Las Vegas, flying in the Middle East, or flying in Africa, or flying wherever. Like if someone is on line of sight, if someone sees your aircraft, you have a problem. Like you're kind of in the opposite way. So you're working a lot with learning GPS systems too, and learning how to network, how the network goes from stateside to flying in such a remote location, and it's so drastically different.
Yeah,
I can't fly a DJI to save my life.
Mission planning wise, how do you see that going from the KC-10, those type of mission profiles, to what's being done on the unmanned side?
In what way?
Obviously, it's a different use case, but do you see a difference in the way the missions have to be planned, how you brief those flights, or anything like that? Because you're not there with the aircraft, and in theory, you definitely want to be concerned if there was an issue and the aircraft went down, but you don't have to be concerned about human life necessarily if that happened. So are there differences in the way you plan those missions?
Yes and no. So with the KC-10, I mean, in any manned system, right, you have to pre-flight the aircraft. There's hours of, SOEs that come up leading up to that point. What the mission is. You get a mission packet. This is what you do. You have a flight plan, that kind of thing. Versus with unmanned, we're flying 24-hour operations, and we do what's called no blink. So essentially, we have a launch and recovery crew overseas that will launch and take the aircraft. So we'll fly the mission here. They'll launch and recover it. They'll bring it to us, and they'll get eyes on to the target that we've been on. And as soon as they've confirmed eyes on, we give them this aircraft and we take the new one. So having those 24-hour operations running, it's a drastically different way of mission planning, because I'm not going to be there for 24 hours. So I'm expecting the pilot ahead of me to give me a full-on handover brief that is, specific enough that I get everything that I need to know, and I can safely sit in that seat and say, yes, I'm prepared to fly this mission. Versus with a manned mission, you show up, your crew learns what it is that day. You plan it, you ask everybody, you do, the risk management, you have everything that's a part of that, and you just hope it goes as planned. There's been so many times where, I've sat on the ground on an airplane for 5 or 6 hours because I'm waiting for a part to get fixed, or I'm waiting to get cleared by ATC, or, stuff like that. And those are the things that add to the human factors fatigue aspect of it as well. Because you do have to update those like operational risk managements, and you do have to consider the human factors piece of it. Whereas with unmanned, while those are really important, and I still stand by, human factors, you can mess up. You can mess up an unmanned aircraft. If you crash an unmanned aircraft, no, you're not talking about life of someone in the cockpit, but you could potentially, you don't know where you're going to crash that airplane into, right? So you could still hit somebody's house, you could still hit a farmer in the middle of nowhere, you could still hit a car. There's still considerations of, do I need to plan an emergency landing point, or what, always having in that back of your mind. Same with manned. If my engine goes out, how long do I have? Where am I going to land this? So there's a lot of streamlined similarities when it comes to mission planning, but when we run with the 24-hour ops, the mission planning is less like packet based, if that makes sense. It's more, you come in with your crew, say you and I are on the shift together. We brief each other of who's going to sit where, and then we go in and get the brief together from that crew, and then we swap out, and that's kind of how it works.
Gotcha. So you could conceivably, with that no blink concept, conceivably fly multiple airframes in a day, right? If they're doing handoffs.
Yeah, we probably will fly 4 to 6 airplanes in a day, depending on what we need it for, where they're going. Because what we can also do is, if you have the fleet for it, you can send them to different locations.
Sure.
And so if at a minimum, if you have 4 airplanes, you can go to 2 different locations and do no blinks from those locations. So the bigger your fleet, the more your capabilities are with that.
Yeah, that's wild. I knew that there would be the crew handoffs, and that's an interesting concept too, where one aircraft has multiple crew on the same mission operating it. You kind of get international long haul airlines. Yes, there's a reserve crew, but they're on board the aircraft. But to have one crew flying 6 different aircraft in a day is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I think the most I've ever flown in one day is maybe 2 to 3 as far as unmanned goes. Mm-hmm. And that was as a result of an abnormality where it's okay, I'm going to send this aircraft back to you, just send me one more, which is a crazy concept too, right? This aircraft isn't working, send me a new one, and you just kind of sit there and you wait for it. But yeah, at a minimum, you're probably flying, depending on where your shift lines up, you're probably flying about 2 different aircraft a day.
Yeah, crazy.
Sitting in the same seat.
So you mentioned ISR. What define that, and then what's that mission like?
So ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. So that is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. So we work for a specific customer within special operations or whomever, and we kind of just go where they need us to go. So we're kind of at their mercy.
So eye in the sky, pretty much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep. If they want us to watch somebody, that's what we're watching. Or if we want us to watch a building all day, they want us to scan the desert, whatever it is that they want from us, like that's what we're there for. So
With the UAS side, I think I saw you do instruction as well, right? Are you an instructor on the aircraft?
I'm not an instructor on this current aircraft, but I did on my previous platform. I was.
Okay. What did you see with the students there? Like, what makes a good pilot different from a great pilot?
A few things. Critical decision making, I think, is one of the biggest things that I find when it came to instruction. I've had multiple students that could go through and run a checklist, no problem. When things are normal, they're great. The second you add an abnormality or an emergency, it's all about how they react, the initial reaction, the critical decision making, and knowing what the books are. I think that's one of the biggest things between a good pilot and a great pilot is you can have the stick and rudder skills all day, but if you don't know how your aircraft works or why it works, you're not going to know why it's not working, and you don't know how to fix it. So just knowing what the rules are, knowing what your aircraft does, and being like familiar with the insides and the outsides of that, I think is really important. People love to fly. It's amazing. It makes you feel great, but if you don't know your systems, if you don't know the FAA regulations, you're not really flying well. You can get yourself into trouble. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing is just not letting go of that mindset of always being ready for a check ride. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the student mindset is prepare for the check ride, prepare for the check ride, prepare for the check ride. Okay, it's done. Now I can relax. And it's like, no, you're still flying. You still have to fly the same way you would in a check ride. So I see a lot of that and complacency. Complacency kills. Like you'll hear it a million times in aviation. I'm sure you've heard it. Like that's one of the toughest things on the UAS side too. Is when you get the same mission over and over again, you get into that mindset of like, okay, yep, I've been here before. I know what we're looking for. I know what we're flying, and you get into that sense of complacency. You kick back just a little bit too much, and that's where that danger zone is. So again, to answer your question, I think that is just maintaining that like that cognitive, hey, I'm still flying an airplane mindset.
Yeah. Did you see a difference in that mentality from being in the KC-10 to people that operate UAS? Because I remember an anecdote, and I don't want to get it wrong, but I think there was either a study done or something that the military was working on where they're trying to get people flying more of the unmanned stuff, and it's like if they had a background in video games or something like that, there's just a cognitive disconnect, and they were more likely to make mistakes because they had that like, oh, I died in the video game, I'll respawn kind of mindset. Yeah. Have you seen any of that?
Maybe not specifically, but yes, I can see how that would be a thing. You can tell the crews that have flown manned before because the CRM dynamic is significantly different. Mm-hmm. The way that you talk to each other is significantly different. In the manned sector, everything is ATC call out. You respond to ATC. You kind of set it up. You call it out on both sides, right? Altimeter change. Okay, I changed the altimeter. They verify I changed the altimeter. On the unmanned side, you still do those things, but it's a lot less rigid, if that makes sense. And you do get into that idea of a lot of people who fly unmanned don't have like further manned licensing, or they got their private pilots and they got their instrument rating and then they moved directly into unmanned, so they didn't get a lot of experience with making radio calls or those kinds of things, like the small stuff that you wouldn't think would be that difficult but is still required for the proficiency aspect of it is very noticeable between an unmanned crew or somebody who has been only unmanned versus somebody who's come from manned to unmanned.
Right. Did you work with people with civilian and military backgrounds? Is it a mix?
Most of the people Both. To answer your question, both. Okay. Most of the people are military in some way, shape, like prior military, some way, shape, or form. I think we only have maybe 3 pilots that were not prior military.
I remember there was a big boom. A lot of the guys, I went to Embry-Riddle, and a lot of the guys I graduated with at the time, it was like 2013 or 14, and airlines weren't really hiring. A lot of them went and did military contract UAS stuff.
Sure.
Do you see differences in the operations there and their training and the way that they, their discipline or whatever it might be, the way they operate with the civilian versus the military background?
Absolutely. I think that civilian flying teaches you to fly with a very different mindset than military flying does. Civilian flying, I did all of my pilot's licensing through the United Aviation Academy. So I did everything on the civilian side, but up through flight engineer and just my experience militarily, I got all of my training through the Air Force. So I had the benefit of kind of seeing both sides of it, which is cool. Gives me a little bit of an understanding of why people who were not in the military think the way they do. The military is willing to accept more risk because the mission is more critical. Versus civilian flying, you're not adapt to that, right? Like you're not. When I was going through commercial, and I have, oh my gosh, I have to do this cross country to the Grand Canyon. Like that's not life or death. Versus the military, it's like we got to get this plane off the ground. What do you need from me, to get this plane off the ground in order to accomplish this mission? So the mindset and the drive as far as the push goes is very different. So I find that a lot of the civilian people are a little more risk adverse versus the military side of things, where I'm not going to say we're, a bunch of cowboys or anything, but we kind of understand what's on the other end of it and what we're supposed to be supporting. And we get that clarity from our customer so that they're saying hey, this is kind of what's on the other end. This is why we need you. So when we're pushing you to get off the ground or we're pushing you to do this, it's dire because of XYZ versus the more of a laid back civilian mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, lives are on the line on the military side and you see that kind of same level of accepting higher risks with Coast Guard, with medevac guys.
Absolutely.
Those kind of backgrounds where, I'm flying a Delta regional jet to Des Moines. Is it that big a deal if I don't make it? No.
Does anybody actually want to go to Des Moines?
Yeah. UAS has obviously become a big part of both military and civilian operations. How do you see that kind of progressing modern U.S. air defense?
I mean, I think it already has. I think it's been very significant. We see a lot less troops on the ground. A lot of our, admittedly, I'm probably a little myopic because I work specifically with, special operations. So that's kind of the small niche that I'm in. So the more autonomy we have as unmanned aircraft, the less people that they have to send on the ground, which I think is important, right? We're moving into a new modern day type of warfare where we're sending people in when it's necessary, and we're sending as little as possible because we have these armed and unarmed unmanned aircraft that can carry out some of these capabilities that we didn't used to be able to do. As far as AI and ISR specifically, I think that we still need to be kind of careful about it, kind of going back to what we talked about with the single pilot ops. I think that AI can be good. I think autonomy can be good. But I still think that we need to maintain a manned presence. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of our biggest things is keeping up with the policy, and that as far as U.S. national security policy, U.S. not just U.S. but worldwide flying policies, and we have the FAR aim, right, or each military has their regulations book, but we're not. Technology is advancing faster than we can rewrite these policies, and I think that's really where it's going to start to become important, and so that we don't get into a lot of these ethical gray areas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we saw that a lot on the commercial drone side too. It's like, the last gentleman I talked with, and his episode will go up next. He worked on setting up the Part 107 for the U.S. and integrating drones into the national airspace. He worked at the FAA for a long time, and he was just talking about the challenges there. And once you started saying unmanned aircraft, some people in Congress were thinking, oh, cruise missile and that kind of stuff. So it's
Just
like,
instant panic.
yeah, instant panic. And we see, I don't know what changed in the mindset of people over the last 10 or 20 years, but it's like the technology is almost scaring people away from the policy side, where they want to, when something happens, they want to immediately try to ban it or limit it in some way. And it's like, how do we funnel that to be for good?
I think a little bit of that mindset is almost more generalized, right? People are inherently adverse to change in anyway. When you get a process that's been the process for so long, and then you insert something new that people just don't understand, a lot of what I see is, well, that's how it's always been. Why are we changing it?
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with it? Why are we changing it? It's like, things don't have to be wrong to change. And I would rather see an aviation world that is working in policy and working in these growths in a more preventative measure versus a reactive measure, because that's where you save lives. Is how can we prevent accidents? How can we prevent abnormalities, emergencies, versus we had this emergency, we had these lives lost, now we have to change. And I think that that's a mindset that we kind of need to shift towards more. Within the FAA, within the military in general, is I would hate to see a KC-46 crash or a KC-10. Ugh, big rip. Or I'd hate to see an aircraft crash for it to spark a light of, okay, now we need to make a policy change.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned complacency kills, and I think we saw that with the DCA crash earlier this year. And it's just so unfortunate that it's got to come to a big event like that, because the more that comes out about it, seems like there were many, many reports about close calls in that area, and not just there, and I'm not calling out, those operators or that area in particular, but it happens everywhere. Like
Sure.
you said, just we got to be more proactive about it as a community, to make sure that we don't end up with another situation like that. I didn't think that we would see another U.S. airline crash in my lifetime before that happened. I thought we were past that, but I think if you just accept higher levels of risk, you're gonna run into that.
Well, I wonder, and I can't really speak to the commercial side of it, but we have these very busy regions too, right? Like the Northeast is extremely busy when it comes to flying in general. So, at what point are we saying, okay, we can't do any more flights here? We are like tapped out on airplanes here, because these large companies are going to want, they're going to want to get their money. The more they fly, the more money they make. They want that ROI. So is there a cap in these regions where it's like, okay, I can't fit another airplane in my airspace. I can't fit another flight route in my airspace, especially when you're talking like New York, Newark, Philadelphia, DC, Baltimore, like Boston. That whole string is just insanely busy. And then you're adding military aircraft on top of it. It's becoming very convoluted, and like you said, it's just where's the line as far as complacency and
Yeah,
that.
and who gets to make that call? Does
Yeah.
ATC have the right to step in? And in some cases they do. They say we can't accept any more aircraft, but I'm sure they get pressure from the airlines and the government as well. Their representatives saying, airlines are petitioning me and saying they want to get more aircraft into your airspace. Why aren't you letting them in? So we just got to be careful about that.
Yeah.
So, with what you learned in your time at the DoD and what you've seen with the advances in UAS tech and all that stuff, what do you think the commercial side can learn from the defense side in terms of aviation? Whether it be safety or operations, risk mitigation and acceptance.
I think with kind of going back to what we were just talking about with just technology advances and stuff like that, I think that the military does a lot with data-driven results. They They get something, they take something, they test it, they implement it, and they do it quickly, and then they kind of learn from those and will adjust from those. Whereas I think the FAA or the commercial side of things is very risk adverse, where they have, nope, this is our really thick book that you get to read, and they don't, they'll release a new one every year, but they don't accept the risk, or they don't accept the technology as fast, in my opinion. And I understand there's a difference there as far as who's willing to risk their lives, right? Like if I'm a casual passenger on United Airlines, do I want United taking unnecessary risks to advance technology? I don't know. It depends on what it is. But I think that overall, the speed and the flexibility that the military uses in order to almost accept these technologies and say, no, like we can use these and these could be really positive, and do a lot of that testing and implementing in such a quick manner. I think that if the commercial side of things wants to progress in the same way, they need to start actively doing that.
Do you think there's a budget limitation there? Because with the military, I mean, kind of historically, they've had an almost unlimited flow of resources there monetarily. And on the commercial side, you could argue, the companies like Delta, United, they're making tons of money. They can do whatever they want to do. But you have limitations with air traffic control. They're government funded, and they arguably don't get enough of it. We've been talking about next gen and how we manage our airspace since I was at Embry-Riddle, almost 15 years ago. So do you think maybe the military is willing to test and accept newer technologies because the budget doesn't matter, or do you think it's just the mindset of being willing to accept more risk to try something new to try to make it better?
Both and neither at the same time. So the budget is what the budget is, but I don't think it necessarily has as much to do with money as much as it has to do with, this is the mission that I'm being presented with. What technology do I have around me in order to execute this? Versus the commercial side of things, they know what their end goal is, right? Their goal is this route to this route, this route to this route. They have their outline planned. And I don't think, I can't speak for the budget at Delta or American, but I can't imagine that they're like hurting for money for a glass cockpit. So I think that it could go either way. I think it's more so the mindset of the military is, I have this mission, I need to get this mission done. This is the technology that I need to get it done. Show me how to implement it or put it into place, versus the need for swiftness on the commercial side just isn't there.
Sure. Yeah, they're playing with a longer timeline. You mentioned that you went to college briefly and then decided, military was the path you wanted to take. You've since gone back to college, correct?
Yes, I have, yeah.
So describe what you're doing in college and how, taking that military path first has opened up those opportunities for college for you later in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. 1000%, I don't think I would be where I'm at aviation wise or in my life without having had the military experience. I was lucky enough to be able to utilize that time frame in the military to figure out what it was that I wanted to be when I grew up versus when I was 17 and had no idea. And I knew that, aviation in some realm was very important to me. The knowledge base that I gained from being a boom operator and being a flight engineer, I started to gain this interest in the national security and the policy side and wanting to know, hey, these are the missions that I'm doing, but now I want to know why I'm doing them and how they're being implemented and what's the other side of the coin. Kind of that idea of, I want to see behind the curtain just a little bit. So that was kind of the motivation to go back to school. But what happened, or how I kind of got into it, was I started applying for schools while I was on a deployment, and I ended up getting into the veteran cohort at Princeton University. And it was, I think, their second or third veteran cohort that they had at Princeton. So I was able to move in there with other people that were kind of in the same area of life as me. I was a little bit older. I was, I had just turned 30. I was trying a new track in life and hoping it worked. And I had a lot of support there with a lot of people that were doing the same thing. And then I found the United Aviate Academy, and I ended up applying to that. So what I did was I went to the United Aviate Academy and I transferred to the University of Pennsylvania so that I could get my pilot's licenses and kind of go through the United program, finish with my commercial multi, but I also concurrently was able to do the University of Pennsylvania's program as a veteran as well and graduate with my undergrad kind of at the same time. And then after I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, I rolled right into my master's in national security policy, which is what I'm working on right now at Duke.
So for veterans that are looking for opportunities, what does a UAS or post-service flying role look like? What are those opportunities that are available to them?
I mean, kind of what I'm doing right now, working with a lot of these contracting companies that fly unmanned systems. There's a lot of them out there. You have AeroVironment, that is a huge company, and they fly so many different platforms, from long range UAS to short endurance. It depends on what they want to get to. If you want to be a sensor operator, there's options there too. Do you want to be a DoD contractor versus do you want to just strictly work the civilian side of things? There are so many companies that are even coming out with private sector drones for firefighting and stuff like that. So there's just so many opportunities outside of the military in the unmanned world that are just untapped, and I really do think that right now is an amazing time to get into unmanned systems if that's what you're pursuing, because the knowledge base isn't there. So if you have it, I would start seeking out some of these companies that even do General Atomics or Lockheed Martin, the big names that you would think, oh, I can only fly a 737 through them or whatever. Like, no, they have these smaller platforms too, and they can get you into these contracts. Because my very first contracting role, I fell into it by a referral, and it kind of opened the door to like other contracts from there. And I got lucky that I happened to know somebody at that company that was willing to refer me to the job. But once I got that job and once I was able to kind of start working and show, I was willing to deploy or I was willing to do whatever they needed, other doors started opening in that realm. Mm-hmm. As far as manned goes, a lot of these airlines are doing their own academies now. Like United Aviate is doing theirs. I think Delta has one now that they're starting. American is kind of trying to follow suit. And they're good programs. They put you through. They're very fast paced. They're not for everybody, I will say. A Part 61 program can also be an amazing opportunity to slow roll if that's what you're interested in. But if you are adamant about becoming a pilot and you have that drive, some of these fast paced programs through these bigger airlines can be really good opportunities, because once you're in and once you're done and once you've completed all of their licensing, hour build, they'll hire you as a CFI at their school, give you the opportunity to hour build. A few of my friends are doing that now, and they have, gosh, I'm pretty sure most of them have almost 1,500 hours in the last 2 years. So they're burning through it, and they're already starting to get those applications into the regionals. And these flow programs they're good, and they're generous to veterans. They love to see veterans because veterans have the discipline, veterans have the mindset, and it's just a different mindset there.
Good. Yeah, a point on that I've learned from doing these interviews too. Talked to a guy who actually works at Atlas Air. He's flying the 777. But especially I think it applies to veterans. You're coming out of your service. You're typically older. You're in your mid late 20s, early 30s, and
Super old, yes.
if you yeah, ancient. I'm going to be 35 in a month, so I'm doing it.
Happy early birthday.
Yeah, thanks. But if your plan is to go to the majors, time is not on your side. Seniority's everything, and I know there's some horror stories that come out of those accelerated programs, but like you said, if you have the drive and the discipline to just sit down and burn through it, and you can thrive in an environment like that, you're actually learning. You're not, a danger to yourself or others. That can be a really good way to get your foot in the door, because there's guys that have been working their way up that seniority list since they were 22, 23, 24.
Well, and that's the good thing about, I can't speak for the other ones, but with the United program is that once you finish your private pilot's license with them, you start your instrument rating. That's when your seniority starts.
That's great. Yeah, I didn't know that.
So
that's
yeah,
really
like I still, like I have flight benefits through United, like all that. They give you an employee ID. My seniority has started, so my hours are building, and I'm kind of on my own time as far as that goes, but that is one of the benefits to doing these flow programs, because like you said, especially for somebody like me, starting in my early 30s, and I'm up against other students that are in my cohort that are 20, 21 years old.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lifetime ahead of them, and not that I don't, but in the world of aviation, you don't.
Right. Yeah.
The good thing about unmanned is that you don't really have the age caps.
Mm-hmm. And then on the younger side of things, somebody's in high school or maybe early college and they're considering the military. What advice would you give to them?
As an aviator or just in the military?
I guess just in general. Obviously there's tons of roles, and a big reason I started this is to try to introduce people to career opportunities they didn't know exist. Obviously, being around aviation my whole life, there's still so many jobs and career paths and things that I didn't know about until I started working in it more.
Absolutely.
So there's tons of opportunities for, if you want to work in an aviation field, you don't have to be a pilot.
Sure.
But yeah, just somebody that's generally interested in the military. Maybe they went down a path like you. They went to college and thought this might not be for me, or even if they finished college and they're still like, I'm interested and I want to go down that path.
Yeah, I think my biggest advice would be look at everything the branch that you're interested has to offer. And look at everything, even if it's something you might not think is interesting. I've even gone through now, having been in the military for so long, and looked at job titles, and I'm like, oh man, I wish I knew about that 15 years ago or something like that. So having an idea of what you want to do is helpful. It's not mandatory, but I think that it will propel you forward with your own career in the military if you kind of go to a recruiter and you say, I want to be in the military, these are my interests. And then just always have to remember that nobody's going to work for you the same way you will. That's the biggest thing, is if you're sitting around expecting someone else to produce results for your life, it's not going to work out. So you got to know what your interests are. You got to kind of go in there with a plan, and just research it. I think that's the biggest thing. Especially it's 2025. The information is out there. If you want to go in the military, go in the military. You don't have to be a pilot, like you said. There's so many awesome career enlisted aviator jobs where I didn't know boom operators existed, but I got paid to travel the world in my 20s, and it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. And it got me to where I was today. But even aircraft maintenance, I have a lot of friends who did aircraft maintenance and specialized in hydraulics or whatever, engines. They give you a specialization, and then you can go and you can do your M&Ps on the civilian side and have those transferable skills when you're done.
Also very in demand job right now in the
100%.
civilian world.
Yeah. And you always need maintainers, right? I'm not I'm not taking a broken airplane, so respect your maintainers, please. Um, but it's really important, and I found a lot of friends that I went into the military with that did different jobs, did jobs that didn't translate to the civilian world, so they had a really hard time transitioning out of the military. Aviation is it's a small world, it's a small community, but they will take care of you if you get in it, and everybody knows everybody, which could be good or bad depending on who you are. But um, you don't have to be a pilot, you don't have to be a crew member. You can there's so many jobs you can do in the realm of aviation that transfer to the real world. Like even airfield operations management, right? Like they have that as a job in the military, directly transferable to the civilian side of things. So I guess to go back to it, like the advice I would give them is figure out what you want to be, figure out what excites you, but try to line it up the best you can with an idea of what does post-military look like too. Have the short-term goals, have the long-term goals, and know how the military can kind of get you there. Because even with school, if you don't want to go to school right then and there, the GI Bill is, I didn't pay a dime, and I went to, two different very great schools. I couldn't have asked for a better situation. I'm being honest with you. Like, coming out of school with no debt is amazing, and I owe that to the military.
Hey, thanks for watching. For more insights on career opportunities all across the industry, you can subscribe on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. I'll see you right back here on the Aerpod.